One of the hardest things to explain for people who've never lived through narcissistic abuse is that most people don't see it coming until it's already destroyed their life. And by then, the emotional damage is already deep. Because these relationships don't usually start out bad. If they started bad, most people would leave. That's the part people don't understand, and exactly why narcissistic abuse is so dangerous. These relationships usually start better than normal relationships. That's the trap. You meet somebody and the connection feels almost unreal. They want to talk all the time. They want to know everything about you. They put you on a pedestal in front of their family and their friends. Like you're God's gift to the world. They make you feel important, wanted, seen. And the amount of attention that they give you, it feels good. It feels real. Like you finally met someone who genuinely sees you for who you are. But make no mistake, that's exactly why it's so dangerous. That's exactly how it happened to me. And if you've watched my channel for a while, you already know pieces of where all this eventually led. I've already shared, the videos about losing myself in that relationship, losing my peace, trying to rebuild my life afterward, and even ended up homeless for a while trying to recover from the damage that it did to my life, mentally, emotionally, and financially. All those videos are already here. But this is a 3-part series that explains how and why I didn't see it happening and how I got lost in it. And ultimately the damage after getting out. So none of this comes from theory for me. I actually lived it. And looking back now, the signs were there way earlier than I wanted to admit. The problem is they didn't look dangerous at the time. Because narcissists don't usually show up acting abusive. They show up acting deeply connected to you. And that's really what pulls you in. And one thing I notice now is how fast everything moved emotionally. It was way too fast. They mirror your personality, your humor, your values, your pain. It feels like they understand you on a level nobody else ever has. And at first, you mistake that intensity for compatibility. But healthy relationships usually build slowly. Narcissistic relationships feel emotionally accelerated. Like somebody hit fast forward on intimacy. And when somebody is constantly validating you and constantly wanting your attention and constantly making you feel chosen, it becomes very easy to ignore the little things that feel off. And there were little things, lots of them. Every story about their past has the same theme. Everybody wronged them. Everybody was toxic. Every ex was toxic. Every friendship ended because somebody betrayed them. Every boss treated them unfairly. Every family member misunderstood them. And at the time, I thought I was listening to somebody who'd been deeply hurt. But now I realize I was listening to somebody who never took accountability for anything. And that matters more than people realize. Because healthy people can admit mistakes. Healthy people can look back at failed relationships and say, yeah, I wasn't perfect either. But narcissists protect their image constantly. Nothing can ever truly be their fault. And if you pay attention, they usually reveal that very early. I just didn't understand what I was seeing yet, because it's not like any of us had experience with this before. You know, most people don't enter relationships, looking for manipulation. They enter them looking for connection. Because when you genuinely care about people, you naturally try to understand them instead of judge them. That's how empathetic people get trapped, you know, in these relationships. You you give grace where you shouldn't, where you should have been paying attention. And then slowly the emotional control starts showing up. Not aggressively and not all at once, just quietly and subtly. You spend time with your family and their mood changes. You spend time with your friends and they make you feel guilty because it cuts into their time. You run to the store or go handle errands, and somehow that turns into a problem too. Like you don't ever want to be home. You start getting guilt trips for not spending every second of your life with them. And when you're not together, I should say when you are together, sometimes you're even being accused of things that you aren't even doing. If you need a little space, they suddenly act hurt. If you set a boundary, you somehow end up apologizing instead. Little guilt trips, little emotional punishments, little reactions that slowly train you to manage their emotions before your own. And the scary part is you don't even realize it's happening at first. You just start adapting, just trying to keep the peace, trying to avoid tension, and trying to get back to the version of them that you met in the beginning. Because that beginning, it felt real. And that's what keeps people stuck. You know, you spend years chasing the person you met at the start, not realizing that that version was carefully created to hook you emotionally. And another thing narcissists do extremely well, they study you. Your insecurities, your fears, your loneliness, your past trauma, your need to feel loved. And at first it feels comforting. You think, wow, this person really sees me. But later, those exact vulnerabilities, they somehow become the places that hurt you the most. The things you shared while feeling emotionally safe eventually become weapons during arguments, or tools for manipulation, or ways to keep you emotionally dependent. And by the time you fully realize what's happening, you're already attached, emotionally exhausted, confused, over explaining yourself constantly, questioning your own reactions, and trying to fix problems that you didn't even create. That confusion is a huge part of narcissistic abuse. Some people are calling it gaslighting, they're calling it all kinds of things, but make no mistake, it's narcissistic abuse. Healthy relationships usually bring clarity. Toxic ones create emotional instability. And after enough time, you stop recognizing yourself. You become anxious, careful, drained. You start losing confidence in your own instincts. And if somebody would have told you in the beginning where all this was eventually heading, you probably wouldn't have believed them anyway. Because the beginning felt that convincing, that intense. And honestly, that's one of the biggest reasons I'm making this series. Because I know there are people watching this right now who are already seeing some of the signs. People feeling confused in relationships they can't fully explain. People ignoring their gut because the emotional connection feels too strong to walk away from. And I know there's others getting ready to walk straight into this kind of relationship without realizing it yet. I wish somebody would have explained this to me years ago in plain English, not like a therapist and not like a textbook, just real. And I wish I would have listened. From somebody who actually survived it, I'm not saying every intense relationship is narcissistic. And I'm not saying people can't have trauma or painful pasts. But when somebody shows you a repeated pattern of manipulation and victimhood and blame and emotional inconsistency and lack of accountability, don't ignore it just because the connection feels powerful. Because sometimes the people who feel the safest in the beginning become the people who damage you the most in the end. You know, looking back now, I didn't ignore the signs because I was weak. I ignored them because I believed love meant understanding somebody's pain. What I didn't understand back then was, some people use your empathy to gain control over your life. You know, I have other videos on this, folks. If this feels like you should watch them.